Okay, we have one lost speaker, but they're on their way. That's the good news, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Amy Dacey. I'm the Executive Director at the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics here at American University. We're so glad that you're joining us. Because of everything going on with the election right now, we wanted to provide some programming to just talk about process too. There's going to be a lot happening in a week from now, I'm sure, and you're all anxious to see the results, to see what's happening. We've been talking about this election for a long time, but what we wanted to provide was some insights, whether it is experts in the electoral process to really help us understand what we're going to be seeing in the coming weeks. Also, a brief next week, in 2 weeks, we're doing kind of like what happened in the election, what do we know so far? And our third one is going to be about presidential transitions, which I think will be really interesting. We'll have some experts in the field there kind of talking through. But I'm very happy to have us joined today by three incredible individuals who will kind of share with us their insights. Please get your questions ready because I know that there'll be questions about the nuances for that, and we'll do that. But first and foremost, I want to introduce our moderator, who has become a dear friend of mine. I really appreciate Janet. Janet Rodriguez is an accomplished Emmy Award-winning journalist, bilingual multimedia journalist as well. And when I first met her, she was the White House correspondent at Univision. And I graciously asked her to be, and she, thank God, accepted to be our Sine Fellow in 2020. So literally, Janet was our Sine Fellow during the last presidential election. So we had to have her back to do that. She is now head of internal communications at WhatsApp, and she's going to help moderate the conversation today. The missing seat, which will be joining us very soon, is actually a dear friend of mine, Elaine Kamarck, who has really led the charge on electoral politics for a long time. I met her when I was CEO at the DNC. She was the head of on the Rules Committee for years. She's really guided, written some books on presidential primaries. She's also now a senior fellow of governance studies and the director of the Center for Effective Public Management at Brookings. She's really an expert on the electoral election process, and we're so happy to have her join us in a minute. So she'll be here, I promise. And then John Fortier, I just met John a week ago at another event and saw his name and said, oh, you're coming to speak to us in a week. But we're so glad that you're here, John. John is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on Congress and elections, election administration, election demographics, voting and absentee voting, the U.S. presidency, and the Electoral College. This guy even wrote a book called After the People Vote, A Guide to the Electoral College. So we couldn't have gotten a better expert to be with you today. John, we're so grateful that you're here to provide all your expertise. I'll make sure Elaine gets in and joins the conversation. But Janet, maybe you can start a little bit with John.
Sure.
While we're waiting.
Let's kick it off because it is a process. Americans, we love processes, right?
Sounds good.
And
I'm sure we need these microphones, but we'll
have them. We have a very unique process by which we elect presidents. Probably one of the most unique processes in the world, right? The Electoral College doesn't exist in many places around the world. So how does it work here in the US? And what is the primary purpose of the Electoral College?
So that's a big question. We could probably spend a couple of days talking about it, but maybe just a quick timeline so that we can follow along. Many of you know that there are some people called electors. They're people that you're going to elect indirectly by going to the voting booth, and then those people will get elected. First, just to tell you how many there are 538 of them. Basically, each state is going to have two, because they each have two senators, and then they're going to have an additional number depending on how many representatives they have. So the smallest state, Delaware, has 3 electors. Now, these people are actually who you're voting for. Yeah, you're not technically voting for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. You're voting for a set of people that they and their parties have kind of put behind them. And depending on where you vote, you might even see their names in very small print, but usually not. But they're selected by the parties in various processes. So that's already happened. You're going to go to the voting booth. In long ago, early America, sometimes states directly appointed their electors. We don't, no state does that anymore. They have an election code. We run an election. The states resolve their elections. There's differences in how they run elections and a different time frame for that, but they have to resolve their elections in the 6 weeks or so after the election. And then there's a date at which the electors meet. Now, one thing that people sometimes think is this is an electoral college. All the electors come together. No, it's a group, several groupings. Each state the electors from that state meet in their state capitals. And so there will be on December 17th or 19th this year. I will have to look that up. It's now been moved. It used to be on a Monday. It's now a Tuesday in December. But it is the date that around the country, all of those people will meet. They will cast their votes. For the most part, they should really be very loyal, to Donald Trump or loyal to Kamala Harris. Again, only one set of electors from each state gets selected. So if Kamala Harris wins the state, she's going to have those electors. They're going to have their votes, and then those votes are sent off to Washington. And usually a date that nobody had ever heard of, but all of you know now, is January 6th, where, first, just to note that the new Congress will come in, the Congress that's elected in this election. So the new people, whatever majorities they have, will come in on January 3rd. And then on January 6th, they will meet in a joint session with the vice president, or if not vice president, the president of the Senate pro tem, but the vice president will sit, and should be Kamala Harris, sitting there overseeing the process. But as we know, last time there was some question about her role. We don't get into that too much. I'll just say, generally her role is basically ceremonial or moving the process along. And not everybody thought that was what should happen last time, but ultimately it didn't go that way. We've done some things to assure that will be not much of a role at all. Theoretically, there could be some objections to the electors from Congress, but rarely would they succeed. And then finally, if the electors, if somebody gets a majority of the electors, all the states that we know about on election day that add up to 270 electors, that person becomes the president-elect, and the other person becomes the vice president-elect. And then on January 20th, we have a new president and a new president-elect. So that's kind of a timeline. There are some little pitfalls at each of the stages. Maybe we'll talk about those. Maybe you'll be interested in asking about them. But it is a process that goes along from our input as voters to these electors to electing a president and vice president-elect.
But I guess one of the common questions, and I'm sure you get this a lot, is how does the distribution of these electors represent our population and our political landscape as a country?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you might be two ways. Who are they? Because they're kind of sort of mysterious, and two, how representative are they of the population? They're actually pretty representative of the population. People will complain because they're a little not representative. If you think of it this way, our House of Representatives was made to be broadly representative of the people. Each state gets representatives based on how many people they have. So California has now 54 electoral votes, and the small states have 3. Or 52 Congress people, and the small states have 1. The part that's a little unequal is the Senate. And if you really wanted to complain about a body that is somewhat unequal, it's the Senate, where California has 2 senators, as does Wyoming. California with almost 40 million people, and Wyoming with 550,000 people. That comes into the Electoral College a little bit, but the overall number is somewhat related to the population because of the House. Who are they? They're usually unknown people you've never heard of. They typically are people who are loyal to the parties, work for the parties. The parties can depend upon them. They're not allowed to be members of Congress. That's a small detail, but they're maybe local officials, state officials, people who've proven their worth, and we expect them to go in and vote the right way. If they're elected to vote for Kamala Harris, they're Democrats who have been selected by their state's party, and only on rare occasions has some of them kind of voted the wrong way. But that's what we're expecting.
And do they change throughout time to reflect the changing population of the many states?
So they do change, like as the House of Representatives does with our census. So our census, of course, we have every 10 years, and by the time we do it, we will implement those changes in the year with the 2 after it. So 2022, that was not a presidential election, but 2024, we are in a new cycle because we've recalculated the population, reallocated some states, slower growing states like New York have lost some representatives in their House of Representatives, and some places like Texas have grown. So Texas now has a slightly larger part in the Electoral College than it did 4 years ago, just because of growth of population we recounted.
Mm-hmm. And I keep asking my own questions here because I'm so interested. But do they also change in in the capacity of women, men, Black, Latinos? Like, how are we represented in those terms in the Electoral College?
So I don't know. I actually have to go look at the lists. I mean, in some ways, these people are obscure, and we don't usually see the list of all the people together. There's somebody who must have studied this. Elaine may have the answer to this. They are not people who are long serving, right? In some ways,
Who are not people?
the electors. The electors,
Oh,
technically,
no.
their service really is only one day, right? They show up, they cast the ballots, and then
I know,
the next
wait,
election,
I know
new
who they
people
are.
come up.
I know who they are.
Yeah, you tell
So
us.
who are they? Tell us.
They are long-standing,
That I know. I mean,
They
how
are-
about
they are-
demographically? Yeah.
they are chosen by the political parties in
Right.
each state.
Right.
They are long-serving volunteers to the political party.
Yeah.
So they are chosen for their service to the party and their loyalty to party, okay, to prevent what they call it, the electors who decide to vote for somebody else for some reason. So that's who they are. Demographically, I don't know who they are, right? I'm not sure anybody knows or cares for that matter.
Okay. Very good. I know we're going to hold questions until the end, but actually we can open them and have a lively conversation.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, like, does it matter, for example, California, all 54 of its electoral votes are gonna go to the Democratic candidate? Would it matter in California, like, who the Republican Party is picking to be Republican electors in California, or it's only like
Nope.
in Republican states
Nope.
or in Democratic?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean,
Whoever.
doesn't matter because the electors are usually by statute required to sign did you go through this?
Nope, you've got-
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They go into the Capitol, right? These people who are on the ballot, okay? Sometimes their actual names are on the ballot. Sometimes the ballot just says electors for Donald Trump. Election day happens, the governor certifies who won the state. The electors go to the state capitol, usually in a big room, a big rotunda, and they sign the certificate of ascertainment. And that's what goes to the Senate, and that's what the vice president reads aloud, and that's how we elect a president of the United States, technically, okay? Doesn't matter who they are, as long as they sign the certificate. And only one set of electors is allowed into that room, okay? That's why all this fake elector stuff that Trump tried last time, none of it works. I mean, there's a room, it has cops in it, it has state police guarding the room, state police guarding the certificate. Okay, state police making sure the certificate makes it to Washington, D.C. Okay, so fake certificates, fake electors, all of that stuff. Okay, people know it's fake. And so it doesn't really matter who they are as long as they're loyal citizens and they show up that day.
And Elaine made the point, which is right, that many of them, I mean, they're loyal people, so we expect them to vote for the Republican Democrat. But many of them are, but not all of them, are bound in some way.
Mhm.
And that's actually some of them become even more strongly bound in very recent years. In the early days of the Electoral College, some people imagined that maybe they would deliberate and have some
Right.
choice. We pretty quickly moved past that.
We're
but,
past that.
But I would say, when I wrote my first book on the Electoral College, people were bound, but it was sort of a loose binding. Like, yeah, you're bound, or you have a $500 fine. There are actually a number of states now, I think we're up to 13 states or so, which have this very strict way of binding them to the right people. Because occasionally in the past, somebody has kind of thrown away their vote. It's never changed the outcome, but they voted for Colin Powell or
Well, no,
Spotted Eagle.
usually it was Southerners. It was Southern segregationists who were technically Democrats. This happened in the 48 and 52, who the state went Democratic, but they were opposed to what was becoming the Democrats' views towards civil rights. So what they did is they voted for Wallace or for a segregationist candidate.
Or you had some states even vote to say we're not binding ours to anybody, but sort of the Democrat. I mean, there was some confusing, but in recent years, what we've had is sort of somebody throwing away a vote or two. But that has been made harder by a number of the states that have these laws that say, if you vote the wrong way as an elector, you are actually going to be immediately replaced by somebody who can do their job. And I wasn't actually sure the court was going to uphold this, but the court did. The court,
Yeah.
a case called Chiafalo a few years ago. So we do have a number of states that absolutely bind their electors. There's almost no way they could, and then some others that sort of loosely bind. But we also expect most of them to be, or all of them really, to be loyal to their party, because that's how they're selected.
So of course, we also have the popular vote. We are all going to go and vote, right?
Right.
If we're allowed to.
Yep.
So what's the difference here?
Oh, it's a big difference. It's a bit, well, have you gone through the malapportionment questions?
I told her I was apportionment. I said it wasn't so off because the Senate, but you may have a different.
Oh, it's
way of doing
horribly
this.
off. It's.
Well, the Senate is very, very
Right.
malapportioned.
The
Put it that
Senate
way.
is
The
malapportioned.
overall of the Electoral College is mostly the House.
Well, I mean, look, you gotta, have you gone back in time yet?
We can go back in time. But,
You gotta go back in time to 1787 with the Constitutional Convention. In 1787, there was not one United States of America. There were 13 colonies. Some of them, like Virginia and Massachusetts, were big and powerful, and some, like Delaware and South Carolina, were not. So in order to get everybody to sign on, first of all, they had to create the United States Senate, where everybody had 2 votes, even at that time, some states were much bigger than others. Then they, at the last minute, sort of invented the Electoral College as a compromise, right? So the Electoral College was the House members plus the 2 senators. Now, for more than 100 years, this made no difference, really. No difference at all. I mean, there was the election of 1876, but that was really much more about civil rights and the end of the Civil War. For the entire 20th century, there were 25 presidential elections. None of them resulted in a situation where one party won the popular vote and one party won the Electoral College vote. None of them. Already in the 21st century, we've had 2 of these, okay? The election in 2000, the election in 2016, and who knows, we could have, right, another one, right, John? We could have another one. So what happened in between there? Well, what happened in between there, and this always surprises audiences, is something called the Agricultural Revolution. And you go, what? What? Well, what did the Agricultural Revolution do when we moved from farming that was very much local to agricultural scale farming? The interior of the country emptied out, right? Emptied out, went to the coast, right, for jobs and manufacturing, et cetera. Because guess what? We can now grow food, not just for us, but for the whole darn world. We could grow food with a handful of people because it was mechanized, it was corporatized, et cetera. That thing, which has been very good in many instances, we do feed the world most of the time, created an imbalance the like of which we've never seen. We had never seen in America, with the 2 top-heavy coasts with lots and lots of people, and a middle pretty much empty of people. And yet we retained the same Electoral College, right? Where everybody, first of all, everybody gets 1 member of Congress. So 1 member of Congress in Wyoming represents about 500,000 people. That's all there are. 1 member of Congress in California represents almost 800,000 people. All right. Then what we did in the 1921 is we capped the number of people in Congress at 435. So that had the mathematical effect of making this distortion even worse. Had we not done that, California would now be casting 70, 80 Electoral College votes, not the 54 that they're stuck at. So all of a sudden, because of the way the country grew, all of a sudden the Electoral College is causing great distortions in government. And the distortion is that it is much more likely in this day and age that somebody who wins the popular vote will not win the Electoral College vote and will have a minority president, as we have twice with H.W. Bush and with Donald Trump in his first term. Now, if this happens again, this could be real trouble. This could be a real constitutional crisis, because what is one of the bedrocks of representative democracy is majority rule, right? And all of a sudden, we're going to be in a situation where majorities are not ruling. And by the way, these trends are not stopping. The middle of the country is not getting repopulated, okay? These coasts are growing and growing and growing. That's where the jobs are. That's where the prosperity is. That's where the information economy is. And the information economy is also keeping the middle of the country sparsely populated because you can grow wheat, you can grow soybeans, you can grow rice, you can grow all sorts of things with very few people and lots of machines. So it's a trend that is not going to stop. And the governance consequences are quite serious.
So I agree with Elaine, but probably have a little bit of disagreement here. So there is the malapportionment of the Electoral College that results from the fact that each state gets 2 electors for having senators, and some of the smallest states get 1. But I think if you look around, the very smallest states are kind of split evenly between the parties, right? There are a lot of small states, like Vermont and Delaware.
Delaware.
DC is not a state, but it votes the Electoral College as a state. So those are some of the smaller ones, and there are 4 Republican ones. So I'm not so worried about that. I think the imbalance comes, and it's partly related to the trends that Elaine said, but comes from the fact that we have the winner-take-all system in states. So winner-take-all means, and especially in the last few elections, if Democrats win California, which they have been the largest state by 30%, that means there are all these votes that are sort of wasted votes, right? If they won by 10 votes, in 2016, Hillary Clinton actually got them a popular majority by having California, right? She would have lost the rest of the country, but California is very important. And some of
By the way,
big
Al
states,
Gore too, in 2000, it was all in California.
and some of and that was closer though, but some of the states, there used to be a Republican state, which was big and not so close. That was Texas, and Texas has actually gotten closer. So I do think there are these trends. I think it could, people have talked a little bit, well, I think that Electoral College advantage for Republicans is shrinking. I'm not so sure about that. I guess I'm going on the assumption that somewhere in the 2.5 to 3.5 point range, Democrats would have to win by that much to win the Electoral College this time. That would be consistent with the last couple of elections. Of course, it could change. I think it will change over time. One big way it could change, of course, is a state like Texas moving towards Democrats actually flips to the Democratic Party, right? And then maybe we're talking about a different set of things. Another way of looking at it is Donald Trump won a little bit more of the popular vote than Mitt Romney in 2016, but he won it much more efficiently. He was able to win these pretty big states in the Midwest by a small margin. So partly it's the winner-take-all system. Yes, it's our demographics, but I think that winner-take-all is probably bigger than the fact that some of the small states are slightly overrepresented in the Electoral College.
I'm confused. Sorry.
Yeah.
Winner-take-all, and yet.
Each state.
Correct. And yet each party's electors are obligated to vote for that party's candidate. So what is it? I mean, is it you take it all? Or
No, they get all the
winning,
electors.
only the winning party's electors get sent to the state capital. So in California, right now, there are 2 sets of electors sitting there, behind the ballot. Kamala Harris is going to win California. I'm going to say that right now. I predict. And those Democratic electors are the ones who are going to be the official electors. They're going to go to Sacramento, and they're going to cast votes that get sent to Washington. So
It means winner take all the electors.
Right.
Think of it that way. Okay, you get everybody.
Right. And there are just, some of you know that there are 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, which are a little bit different. They split by district, so you could maybe get 1 elector or the other person gets more, but for the most part, it's winner take all.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is that the Electoral College has just not kept up with the times. So what is the argument for keeping the Electoral College system?
The argument for keeping it is very simple. It's almost impossible to change. All right.
How so?
It's in the Constitution, very specifically in the Constitution, including the election that takes place in the state legislatures. So you need a constitutional amendment. Nobody wants to do that. They don't know exactly what else might happen. Okay, so it's there. But secondly, it's hard to change for the same reasons it was invented in the first place. All the small states. Okay, the state legislatures have to pass this, right? The Congress has to pass it in the state legislatures. So why does South Dakota, why would they want to vote for this, right? Why would Vermont want to vote for this? They're in good shape. Nobody would go there, okay? No people live there. Wyoming, I literally looked this up once, has more sheep than people, okay? Honest to God, it has more sheep than people. That's one of its big industries. Nobody would go to these places. And that's the very reason. So the reason it was created in the first place is the reason it will probably stay as it is.
So on why we might keep it, I mean, I think there's one feature of the Electoral College which is consistent with our country. Now, I wouldn't necessarily design everything like it and representation around it, but it is that we are a country of states, and the way we run elections is very different from state to state. And I think people who want to sort of say, let's go to a popular vote, realize that would result in a lot of changes. Maybe you'd like them, but the state of Oregon votes 100% by mail. That we have different polling hours in different places. We have different machines, different traditions. Alaska is very different for geographic reasons. We probably have to say, let's vote the exact same someplace everywhere. And also we probably have to say, let's run the election from Washington. Let's have an electoral commission that watches over it. So I think, that is one benefit. Again, I think if we, knew what the states look like and we were starting fresh, we might do it a slightly different way. But I don't think the idea that we use the states as kind of pieces in this is a crazy thing. On the argument against, I think Elaine's right, it's very hard to change. Two things. One, yes, the constitutional amendment is very difficult. I don't think that the small state argument, though, is really winning the day today. I honestly think it's much more of a left-right argument about this.
Partisan.
And part of that is
Partisan.
because there is an alternative way to change the Electoral College. It's complicated, but it sort of tries to use the current mechanisms of the Electoral College. Some people may have heard of it. National Popular Vote Compact is one way of describing it. And without getting into all the details, the idea is each state has some leeway as to how they assign electors. And as I say today, all the states say, we run an election, we have an election code, we follow that, the winner of the vote gets these electors. But the National Popular Vote Compact says, we, the state of, let's say, California, which is signed on to this, will commit to all of our electors going to the winner of the popular vote. Even if the person, Donald Trump is the winner of the popular vote, but Donald Trump lost our state by 30 points, we commit to sending our electors to that. Now, there's some complications as to, you'd have to get a good number of states together all to do it. They'd all have to add up to essentially 270 electoral votes. You imagine the map that you're looking at on election night. How does Kamala Harris or Donald Trump get to 270? Well, that's the same thing for this proposal. All those states would have to go. Now, many Democratic states have passed this. And again, there's some constitutional questions or implementation questions of how it would work as a compact. But I think at this point, most of the states, even the small Democratic ones, Delaware and others, have passed this. And they would need some of the purple states. So, their strategy will be similar to our candidates. They'll be looking for get the blue wall states to support this. It'd be interesting to see how it will go over if it goes that way. But it is moved a long way. I think the distance it needs to move is not so far, but it's also the harder states. So we'll see what happens.
And everybody, the students particularly, should look at this, the National Popular Vote Compact, because it's about the only idea out there, frankly.
It is easier. It's not easy, but it's easier to do than amending the Constitution.
Yeah.
Which is big supermajorities. Here it's winning over the legislatures in a number of states that adds up to a majority of the Electoral College.
And of course, campaigns are responding, right? Campaigns are looking at where are the Electoral College votes, where do they need to win,
Right.
where do they need to focus on? So how does this system changes the way campaigns run?
Oh, well, they'd sit in California for one thing. They'd sit in California, and I'm doing an order of population, California, Texas, Florida, and New York. All right, that's where you would campaign. And then some of the medium-sized states as well. And you'd look, for instance, Democrats would look in Omaha, right, for a blue, they would look to the blue, Democrats would look in Austin, Texas. They'd look for the blue parts of the states. But basically, right now, the big states are cut out of the action. And it would dramatically flip this to the big states.
I mean, the inverse of that, I think, implied by what Elaine's saying is, of course, today in our current system, the states that are the swing states that's where all the action is, right? That's where all the money is. That's where the advertising is. If you sit in one of these states, you are bombarded by advertising. Now, those states change a little bit over time, and sometimes people think surprise us or make a play. I see some. I don't think Donald Trump is going to win Virginia, but he's getting feeling a little bit his oats and saying I'm going to have some rallies in Albuquerque and in Virginia and New Hampshire, places like that. But still, there are many states that obviously are not going to go. And also, interestingly, I think for Democrats, Florida's still a pretty close state. Now, Florida has moved a little Republican, and Texas is becoming more, Florida was three plus points and Texas 5.5 points. That's pretty close, but they're super expensive. So playing as Democrats to say, oh, I'm going to take a shot at those states. It's not like just like, let's see how it works. They're going to have to commit to it. Whereas, a little state like New Hampshire or Maine or something like that might be easy to kind of throw a little more. New Hampshire still has the Boston market, but a little bit easier to throw money at.
So as I listen to both of you, the question remains, what is the incentive for the voter to then go out and vote?
I don't know. It's a good question.
What's the incentive, right, for you and me to go out and vote if we live in a state, for example, where we know either the electoral doesn't matter, or it's going to go blue or red
It's
either
the
way?
it's the moral victory. I mean, you still want to run up. You still want your person to run up a majority, an electoral college, a popular vote majority. It is still meaningful, and to the extent that this keeps happening, it's going to erode the electoral college. To the extent that we keep having non-majority presidents, it's really going to erode the electoral college. And you can tell this because when lately Trump has gone to rallies in California, in New York. And one of the things his folks said when asked, why are you going to these states that you know you're not going to win? And they're concerned about running up a popular vote majority. Everybody knows that this business of winning in the electoral college but not winning the popular vote is really not sustainable over the long term. At some point, this cracks. I may not be alive. John may not be alive, but you guys may not be alive, but some of you in here may be. And that I think is definitely of concern.
And, I will add that, we have these very complicated elections. Many countries, you really are just voting for one office at a time. Just put an X on a piece of paper for your member of parliament. I mean, we do have other races, right? If you're in Ohio, a big state, used to be a swing state, not probably at the presidential level, but it has a very competitive senator's race. Campaigns go places to raise money. They have lots of things way down the ballot in state legislatures and never mind local issues. So there are some other reasons, and our primary process kind of gets people around a little bit too. But it's true on the very, very narrow focus of getting down to the end here. What are the states that matter? You're going to have a focus on just the states that campaigns are, think it's worth their while to raise money, and it's become a smaller number. Initially, it was a bigger number
It was
of
a bigger
states before.
number, yeah.
And that may change too. But right now, I think the 7 is a pretty good number. People can fantasize about number 8. It's probably not gonna pan out.
So let's go back.
Pennsylvania seems
Go
to
ahead.
get a lot of attention.
What's this?
The state of Pennsylvania
Oh, yeah.
seems to be getting a lot of attention. Is there any particular reason for that?
It's the biggest of the swing states, okay, with 19 electoral votes. And it's a very, very close, okay? And what people in presidential politics have said for years about Pennsylvania is Philly and Pittsburgh with Alabama in the middle. Okay, that's literally, in Philadelphia, you got a big urban center, it's very liberal. Pittsburgh, big labor town, very democratic. And then in the middle of the state, you have extremely conservative Catholics, you have rural areas, et cetera, very, very conservative. My mother used to live in Hanover, Pennsylvania, which is smack in the middle. And during the 2016 campaign, she was having surgery, and I was up there a lot, and it was just Trump signs as far as the eye could see. It really was. So it's a very, very close. It's a close state, and Michigan's like that too. Wisconsin's like that too. Wisconsin, you've got Madison, which is a huge university town, University of Wisconsin, which is very liberal. You've got Milwaukee, which has some minorities and it's a big city, and then very rural dairy farms, et cetera, in the rest of the state. So, a state with that kind of composition, right, is really prone to be a swing state in this day and age.
And I guess the other slightly cynical thing I would say is I tend to tell people, foreign visitors, media, others, you can get to Pennsylvania really easily. So the Washington media is, they just drive right up the road. They can be in the border. Now. These other swing states, now that Virginia is no longer a swing state, is sort of the key one they go to. So, but I think it is also, I mean, the states actually, it's interesting. The 7 states are probably even more closely grouped than they were in 2020, at least what the polls look like. But if you really try to game out which is the most favorable to each, you might come up with something. You're probably going to find Pennsylvania, and I would say maybe Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, probably the really 2 ones that are more in the middle, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So I'll put you on the spot. What state do you think will decide the elections on Tuesday?
Well, I'm not sure it'll decide it, but it could. Look at North Carolina. North Carolina will come in early, come in at 7:30. They're counting their absentee ballots right now as they come in, so there'll be no delay in counting the vote.
How many electoral?
What's that?
16.
16.
Okay.
16. So 3 less than Pennsylvania. But right now, Trump won it last time, but Obama also won it. So it's been Democratic. And there are 2 big predictors of the vote in this election. One is, of course, gender. Women are way, way more apt to vote for Harris than men are. And the second predictor of the vote is, do you have a 4-year college degree? And North Carolina is one of the states where there's been a big influx of people with 4-year college degrees because of that research triangle around Raleigh-Durham. And so there's a demographic change. Now, look, these demographic changes happen slowly. But then all of a sudden, there's a point where, as John referred to, Texas is Democratic, okay? And it's been creeping in that direction, right? We've seen it coming. It will happen at some point. And, when I was ages ago, when I was in graduate school, Vermont was called rock-ribbed Republican, Vermont. Vermont was a state that went against Roosevelt. Twice. Okay, can you imagine when the entire country was voting for Roosevelt in the 30s, Vermont was voting Republican. And now what is Vermont? The state that has the only Democratic Socialist senator that we've ever had, and then maybe that we ever will have, okay? Why did that happen? Well, it happened because there were a lot of New Yorkers, particularly from the Upper West Side, very liberal people, came from, red diaper babies. Probably nobody here knows what that term is. Red diaper baby is you grew up in a sort of communist household in New York City. They literally called them red. They had their own camps. Okay, can I tell you this, in the 30s and stuff. So you had red diaper babies. They grew up. They decided they didn't want to live in New York City anymore. They moved where? Up to Bucolic, Vermont. So you had an influx of New Yorkers changing the population and changing the politics of that state. You have it going on right now in Arizona, where you have an influx of Californians coming in because the housing is much cheaper in Arizona than it is in Southern California, and it's sort of close. So these things happen.
John, what's your prediction?
This young lady has been wanting
All right,
to
let me just say, I think we should grab you, but Elaine's right about the Vermont, but I always thought it was funny because we used to say if you were in a drop out of society and you were on the left, you would find some small town in Vermont. And if you were a drop out of society on the right, or libertarian right, you'd kind of go to New Hampshire across the border. So
Right.
It looked very different. Now, New Hampshire has changed over time, and partly this migration from Boston in another way. But there were these.
But you're right though. New Hampshire still has
relative
that.
relative to the rest of the
This poor woman right here would
Yes.
like to say
Yeah.
something.
I have 2 kind of quick questions. One, you kind of skimmed over Nebraska and Maine being different in the electoral process, and they're both kind of small states. Can you kind of dip into that a little bit more?
Sure. So technically, there's a lot of flexibility for a state of how to assign its electors, right? Early on, many states directly appointed their electors. They moved away from that, but there were all sorts of creative other solutions. Instead of just winner take all, meaning you win the state, you get all the electors. Maybe we should have a bunch of districts, or maybe Maryland had a very strange system. They had East, and Baltimore had one. And, it'd be hard to explain. But 2 states, and it was sort of a relatively modern thing. I'm trying to remember when. Maine did it earlier in Nebraska, but they've done it 30 or 40 years ago. They decided they were going to not have winner take all. What they would do is each state gets 2 senators for being a state, so in the Electoral College. So If you win the state of Maine or Nebraska, you get 2 electors. And then the other ones, Maine has 4, so the other 2 are decided by the district. So there are congressional districts in Maine, 2 districts. One actually happens to be very Democratic on the coast. The other one, which goes up, bigger geographically, is reasonably Republican. Now, for a long time, they didn't actually split their votes. The same thing in Nebraska. But in recent years, Barack Obama had won that one in Nebraska, and Donald Trump has won twice the one in Maine, and Joe Biden won the one in Nebraska as well. So they both kind of have started to split. Like the one district is peeled off by the losing candidate, and the winning candidate gets all the statewide to plus the other districts that they win. So Nebraska happens to have 3 districts. So there was some talk of changing this at a very last minute in Nebraska. Now, Nebraska also has other weird institutions. One legislature, not 2 parts, unicameral. Also, they have a very high filibuster rate. And somehow they didn't do this, but they were talking about we should switch this to winner take all because that would help Republicans. And somehow Maine was too late for them to respond, but they didn't do that. The one thing would have happened if Nebraska had switched to Republicans, and Kamala Harris won the 3 states, which some people think maybe she's strongest in: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and probably is one of the others. That's an electoral tie, and we haven't talked about what happens there. But there's a special process.
So
for
what does happen there
269.
if we have a tie?
If we have a tie, and we won't have this election, but if for another reason nobody got a majority, maybe there was a third party, and we did have, Elaine mentioned, sometimes some Southern Democrats winning some electors. So if you were actually at 3 parties, nobody gets to 270, or if you have 269 to 269, you have this special election that the House of Representatives elects the president, but using a very different system. Essentially using a system where each state has 1 vote, each state delegation. So again, going back to kind of the inequality here, California, now I know what California's going to do because they're most of the representatives are Democratic. They're going to vote for Kamala Harris. So they vote 1, but other states will, vote for probably who won that state. But you could have some states where the delegates are split 2-2.
Michigan is one, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, actually, Democrats have an edge in Michigan.
Right. Where do we have? Minnesota, I think, has it.
It's
There are
Minnesota.
a couple of others. Right now, the other thing is you need to get an absolute majority. You need to get 26. It doesn't do any good to get 25 to 23 and 2 ties. You need to get 26. Right now, Republicans have 26 delegations. They're also almost certainly going to get North Carolina because they redistricted, and they're going to get that. Now, Democrats have a couple possibilities they might be able to pull out if winning a couple seats in Iowa, 1 in Arizona might do it. But that would just get them to kind of a stalemate. Like it'd be very hard for Democrats to win this. So if we had 269, and Donald Trump had lost the popular vote, the likelihood is he'll probably win using this very obscure part of the Constitution, which we have not used in the presidential race since 1824, where it was controversial, and we used it also in 1800.
And if you go back to what we were talking about, the democratic values there, it's bad enough that we are having elections where presidents lose the popular vote and win the Electoral College. Imagine the outcry. Imagine the Californians saying, what? We are the 7th biggest nation in the world, right? Forget the United States, and we get 1 vote. I mean, it's absurd. And you can see there's a real crisis. All of these things that come from the Constitutional Convention and were fine for for 2 centuries. All of a sudden, we've got real crises of legitimacy with the Electoral College, with the way if it goes to the House of Representatives, et cetera. There's real constitutional crises here, and that could be just a mess.
So with 5 minutes left, if any other questions, but my bigger question is, go ahead and then I'll close.
I was wondering, what are the actual qualifications for the people in the Electoral College? Like, are they just their party just favor them?
Yeah, they have to be an American citizen, and they have to be able to vote, and their party has to have selected them.
And they're not allowed to be a federal officer. They're not allowed to be
Yeah.
a member of Congress.
That's right.
Occasionally, some people forget, but it's.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a real chance, as we were talking about, that the Electoral College is gonna be 270, 268. If Harris wins the blue wall, Trump wins the Sun Belt. Do you think in that case that there will be an unusually high chance for a faithless elector? Or do you think that they will be so scared to tilt the election that we will have no faithless electors, and why?
I don't think we'll have any faithless electors, no. Particularly if it's the Harris one, because she will probably also win the popular vote by a pretty significant margin. Biden won it comfortably last time around. So it'd be very hard for somebody to say, my conscience tells me I have to, not vote for Harris. I don't think that would happen.
So I'm an optimist in a variety of ways. I think a lot of our problems from 2020 there are a lot of reasons why we're in a better place than we were before. One of them, I think, you asked what the closest state will be, and I think this comes to the 270, 268 thing is, it's actually pretty likely that one of the other candidate is going to take most of these swing states. They're so grouped together, right? And we could swing a little swing in one direction or the other. I know we're trying to game out like, what's the middle state? But really, if we are off our polling or our understanding of who's showing up off by a point or two, which we might well be in either direction, right? Either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris could take all 7 or 6 of the 7 states. So I don't think we're going to come down to one state. If we are in that situation, I do, I sit on these groups and in a way they're very interesting academically. And I think they're starting to, people worrying themselves too much. And their worry is, well, maybe somebody would pressure one of those, because it doesn't even have to flip their vote. It just has to have them throw away their vote. So it has only happened in recent years with just throwaways in elections that wouldn't matter. I think the people are not determined to do this, but the people who are really worried are thinking, well, maybe there's some, bribery or pressure on this person, and this would really throw. So I'm not going there. I'm feeling optimistic.
Can I give you a book to read though that's lots of fun?
Sure.
Okay, there's a novel by Roy Neill, Neel, called The Electors. And it plays out a very complicated scenario where it goes into the Electoral College and the actual electors have a lot to do. Okay, and it's lots of fun. And Roy Neill worked for Al Gore in 2000. So he knows the very process. So he gets all the process points right. Plus it's fun and it's kind of, exciting, and let's hope it never happens.
Let's take one more question, and then I'm sure they'll be happy to answer your questions.
How did DC get 3 electors when we don't have senators?
Constitutional amendment. We passed a constitutional amendment in the 1960s that did that. So we have a.
One step towards statehood.
So
I think this,
we're right at time, and I'm
Okay.
sure.
I'm good.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna ask if you guys think that we will find out on election night, or if it'll be like last time, where it'll be a few days because they're still counting the votes.
I think we might find out on election night.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm an
Yeah.
optimist. I think
Yeah,
both,
yeah.
again,
Even with
Close.
Pennsylvania?
Even what?
Even with Pennsylvania?
Yeah, because if you have,
Yeah,
when you have Georgia and North Carolina coming in, you'll have Michigan coming in,
Okay.
so it may not, it could come down to Pennsylvania, and you're right, they will take a long
yeah,
time.
although I think we are exaggerating a little bit with Pennsylvania. If we really came down to it, I think the states to watch are actually out west, they're Arizona and Nevada. They have almost, exclusively mail ballots. Those can take longer. Arizona has some procedures, and Nevada's doing this for the first time with the mail ballots after everybody. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're going to come quickly. I think Pennsylvania, Philadelphia will be a little slower, but I talked to people in Pennsylvania who run elections in counties who are feeling that this is not as big an issue as people think. Inside Wisconsin. So I feel really, other than the 2 western states, if it came down to them, I'd be a little worried, but I'm not as worried.
So getting us back to the topic of today, which was the Electoral College. Where do we go from here then? What's the future with your prediction of erosion and what that means for our democracy?
Well, I'll tell you, if we keep having these elections, as I say, none in the 20th century and 2 in the 21st century, this is a crisis of legitimacy in the system. And it might cause some more states to sign on to the national, what is it?
Popular vote
Popular
compact.
vote
or
compact,
interstate
yeah.
vote.
Interstate vote compact. It's a very
Yeah,
complicated,
there's
it doesn't make
slightly
anything.
different names.
It may cause some more states to sign on to that. Even that wouldn't be the end, because I'm sure there'd be it'd go to the Supreme Court, because you could argue it wasn't constitutional. But so I think you could see that happening. You might see, I mean, there's other ways to skin this cat. I mean, you could see a state deciding, and this I think would be less controversial, to give two of its electoral votes, the Senate votes, to the winner of the national popular vote. Okay, so that would help. All you need is a little bit, frankly, because usually these are, when you have a close election, usually the Electoral College is very close. And you need just a little bit of a push to get the national popular vote winner. But I think if we have another one of these, I really think there'll be a lot of interest in this, because because people understand it's just not fair.
So I think there's a decent chance we won't have the split. I mean, the split will be sitting there, behind the scenes. But I mean, Kamala Harris, if she wins, she's going to win popular vote in the Electoral College vote. There is a possibility that Donald Trump, I think, would have to be sort of eking out a popular vote wins eking out a popular vote, and is on the same side as well. There's still a lot of scenarios where probably we're somewhere in the middle, right? But somewhere between the popular vote being 2.5% to 3% for Harris and Donald Trump eking out a half-point win. So I think that's worrisome. What I will say is, we in my book, latest edition, we have all the polling ever done. One of my colleagues, Carlin Bowman, is able to assemble all polling. And it's not popular broadly. It's usually been 60+% people saying we should get rid of it. But when one party wins because of it, it sometimes narrows a bit. I mean, the Republicans, if they win this way, aren't going to say, oh, well, of course, we're just looking to give it up. They're probably going to be more supportive of it.
Right.
I think there's more pressure on it. I agree with that. I don't know if that pushes us on. I think eventually our demographics will get us out of this, right? I mean, again, Texas changing or something. There are all sorts of things one can imagine that get us out of this. So maybe if we're lucky, we don't face it, and then our demographics gets us out of this. But right now we're in a place that's a little bit dicey.
And dicey will be for a little while longer.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you so much, Janet, and thank you, Elaine, thank you, John. I can't believe that we've had this combined incredible experience with these complicated processes, but also I think it's public service, all your dedication you've done to do this work and to help explain it to us. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody that was in the room. I know we have a bunch of people joining us online, and to let people know, we are recording this and making this available, especially for the next several weeks as people are trying to understand this process and what's happening. We won't hold you to any of your predictions, but I'm going to check in with you after for sure. Thank you again for all
And they
you
can
do.
buy John's book.
Yes,
They buy
absolutely.
John's book.
I need to update my book to 2020.
Yeah. We'll have you come and share with us. But thank you again for all you do and for your expertise. And if you have additional questions, send them to the Sine Institute email, and we'll see if we can, help get those answered too. Because understanding the process is very important. And we always say that what we do after we leave this room is equally important. So I want to encourage everybody, if you have not voted yet, please vote in this election. It does matter, as these incredible experts have pointed out to us. So thank you all very much. And thanks to the Sine team for putting everything together. So thank you.